during the COVID-19 pandemic and for seeing us through to the adoption of the Glasgow Climate Pact. During the last 2 weeks, we have heard acknowledgements that the climate crisis is here again and again. The LDC knows this firsthand. Everyone in this room understands the emergency, but this understanding is not reflected in our collective action. Though we know emissions must halve by 2030, they continue to increase. Climate finance must increase to support vulnerable countries and their people to adapt as best as possible and address the unavoidable loss and damage, yet promises have not been met. The LDC group came to COP26 with high expectations. We leave Glasgow with a package that we can accept, but one that is not enough to protect the lives and livelihoods of our people. To limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we welcome the recognition that rapid, deep, and sustained emission reduction are needed. Our enhanced NDC must collectively meet the 45% reduction by 2030, and updated long-term strategies must get us to net zero by 2050. On finance, we have far more to go on many fronts. The goal of $100 billion per year by 2020 has not been met. Developed countries must urgently meet the commitment and ensure an increase in adaptation finance, the majority of which should be grant-based. We hope that countries will also commit to doubling their adaptation finance from 2019 levels by 2025. On loss and damage, we must register that the Glasgow outcome fell short of what the LDCs expected. We are disappointed that a Glasgow loss and damage facility could not be an outcome of this scope. Support for addressing loss and damage remains a critical issue for our countries and vulnerable populations who are already bearing the greatest cost of the climate crisis, despite contributing the least to it. We are also concerned that the loss and damage paragraph in the COP and CMA decision do not mirror each other, but reiterate that this does not prejudice further discussion on the governance of the WIM, which remains under both bodies. While we accept call for a dialogue in the spirit of compromise, we accept it with the understanding that this dialogue will eventually lead to the establishment of loss and damage facility. On adaptation, we recognize the progress on the global goal on adaptation and look forward to proactively engaging in a Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program. Presidency, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we continue to hear that countries are committed to addressing the climate emergency, but words are easier than action. As temperature continues to grow, so does the adverse impact of climate change. The upcoming years will be critical in seeing a trajectory for the decade and to ensure a safer and better world for all, including for the youth and for the future generation. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now I invite Antigua Barbuda to deliver a statement on behalf of AOCs. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, colleagues, Antigua and Barbuda takes the floor on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. We associate ourselves with the statement by the Republic of Guinea on behalf of the Group of 77 in China. We thank the COP presidency for your tireless efforts to support nearly 200 parties across this finish line. You pulled off a tremendous international event in the midst of a global pandemic. Addressing the climate crisis could not wait. We appreciate the people of Glasgow and Edinburgh, whose warm hospitality kept us going over these weeks. We thank you. And to the engine behind this process, the UNFCCC Secretariat and hundreds of staff that made this possible, we recognize and commend your efforts. The Paris Agreement work program is complete. After years of deliberation, we overcame our differences and found a common path to guide implementation. One common time frame synchronizes our efforts in the plan, implement, review cycle. The enhanced transparency framework will build mutual trust, the currency of multilateralism. Article 6 is now agreed. The mandatory 2% cancellation rate under 6.4 was a major compromise from our AOSIS position. The small silver lining is that we will revisit this figure in 5 years with a track record on the overall impact of the markets on global emissions. Finance Day at COP26 celebrated historic climate commitments from companies covering $130 trillion in financial assets. We implore the private sector to apply today's new best practice guidelines, especially the 5% share of proceeds for adaptation and 2% cancellation rate, as they use the carbon market in 6.2. We have done our job with Article 6 to the best of our abilities. It's time for the private sector to do their job too. On loss and damage, despite our best efforts, both at a political and a technical level, AOSIS was not successful in listing loss and damage as a distinct category in the transparency framework for support. Particularly vulnerable countries must now report loss and damage in a catch-all column at the end, marginalizing our priority. We recognize the presidency's efforts to try to create a space to find common ground. The final landing zone, however, is not even close to capturing the essence of what we hoped. While happy that the Santiago network has finally been given a mandate and functions to do work, technical assistance is only a minor part of the overall solution. Small island nations are already borrowing money to cope with and recover from extreme slow onset climate costs, forced to tap into pension funds, relocate communities, manage internal displacement and internal migration. When elephants fight, it is the grass that gets trampled. The UN Climate Change Convention must protect the most vulnerable nations. Yet safeguards are not in place. When a few hectares of an island's arable land are lost to seawater intrusion, imported food now costs 5 times as much. What next? When a hurricane destroys hospitals and schools, what next? One-off finance pledges do not give us the confidence that our future is secure. We know that you know that island states can no longer absorb the cost of pollution from others. At COP26, we relented on this loss and damage finance facility reluctantly because this package in front of us is our best shot at keeping 1.5 alive. Looking ahead, COP27 will be a referendum for justice in climate change. On mitigation ambition, at yesterday's plenary meeting, we heard a unanimous and profound call for urgent actions for the sake of our future generations, and a clear shift in this room to support keeping 1.5 alive. Today, we have not closed the 1.5-degree emissions gap, but we have set out a process that keeps it in reach, but only if each and every party does their part, coming back to the table with higher pre-2030 ambition. And then implement these plans. Implementation mode requires that we not only talk about theoretical emissions pathways, but also concretely about sources of emissions and sectors and technologies to scale urgently. The same applies to adaptation and resilience, where risks are more insidious and harder to quantify than tons of emissions, but equally important. AOSIS welcomes the 2-year work plan ahead on the global goal on adaptation. The goal of at least doubling adaptation finance is critical, coupled with concrete measures to improve access. On finance, the final decision has galvanized the need for institutions to include climate vulnerabilities in concessional finance and other forms of support. While we have arrived at an acceptable package on finance, the language is slippery. We have been burned before. We heard that our developed country partners will hold themselves to the same standards they hold us when delivering on these financial obligations. As small island states, we are pleased that the ocean, which plays an important role in solving the climate crisis, has been given due recognition. We welcome the decision text on a forum and the invitation to constituted bodies to advance our collective ocean and climate understanding. Together, we need to sprint ahead on the race to zero and the race to resilience. powered by the race to deliver the 100 billion and beyond commitment. It's been a pleasure to work in person again. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now I invite Pero to deliver a statement on behalf of ILAC. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Señor vicepresidente, distinguidos delegados, el Perú tiene el honor de hacer esta intervención en nombre del Grupo de Países ILAC. Permítanme iniciar esta intervención adhiriendo a las palabras del distinguido delegado de Guinea en nombre del Grupo de los 70. ILAC desea expresarle su más sincero agradecimiento y respeto por el liderazgo de la presidencia que ha sido demostrada durante los últimos 2 años. También deseamos agradecer a la Secretaría y a todos sus funcionarios que han trabajado para que esta COP sea posible y a los habitantes de Glasgow que nos recibieron con calidez. Hoy es un día importante en nuestro proceso. Glasgow marca el inicio de una década crítica para la acción climática bajo el marco multilateral establecido en el Acuerdo de París. En el interés del tiempo, vamos a hacer una intervención resumida y el resto de nuestras ideas estarán colgadas en la página web de la Secretaría. Las decisiones del paquete climático de Glasgow no son perfectas y todos aquí hubiéramos querido tener uno u otro aspecto en las decisiones. Sin embargo, la ambición climática es el elemento común. También podemos decir que por primera vez escuchamos el llamado de la ciencia, de la juventud, de las mujeres y de los pueblos indígenas. En este sentido, reconocemos la decisión adoptada en materia de género y cambio climático que permitirá implementar y medir los progresos de la versión mejorada del Programa de Género de Lima. Deseamos hacer una especial mención al encomiable trabajo que vienen realizando los campeones de acción climática y felicitamos el fortalecimiento de la Alianza de Marrakech. Congratulamos que la coherencia con el 1.5 haya sido uno de los criterios rectores de nuestras decisiones. A partir de este escenario lanzaremos los compromisos y los implementaremos en esta década crítica para cumplir en el 2030 las trayectorias necesarias para lograr la carbono neutralidad en el año 2050. Celebramos el acuerdo sobre los marcos temporales comunes, un elemento fundamental del mecanismo de ambición del Acuerdo de París. Lograremos el 1.5 con el multilateralismo y la cooperación internacional. No lo lograremos sin recursos financieros, sin embargo. El contenido de la mayoría de las decisiones de la agenda de finanzas adoptada, tal como hacemos cada año, busca una transformación global que todavía está lejos. En esta ocasión, sin embargo, hemos abierto una ventana de oportunidad que tiene un potencial transformacional. Definir una meta de financiamiento que facilite la transición al 1.5 y en la que pasemos de movilizar miles de millones a billones de dólares. Debemos seguir fortaleciendo nuestro régimen de financiamiento climático con mayor compromiso, liderazgo y solidaridad de los países desarrollados. Es nuestro deber proteger la ambición trazada en el Acuerdo de París a través de un sistema abierto donde la información sea una herramienta que pueda monitorear el progreso. ISLAC insiste firmemente en que todas las partes aseguren la transparencia sobre las acciones de mitigación y adaptación. El artículo 6 se creó para aumentar la ambición de las partes de manera cooperativa. Para lograr esta ambición, debemos medir cuidadosamente cada unidad que podría compensarse por las emisiones en otra parte del mundo. Reconocemos en particular el esfuerzo de la decisión marco de mantener un nivel de ambición coherente con el 1.5 y por primera vez se reconoce el lineamiento científico de reducir en un 45% las emisiones con respecto al año 2010 para el año 2030. Acogemos con beneplácito el establecimiento y lanzamiento del programa de trabajo sobre la meta global de adaptación, con miras a reforzar la acción y el apoyo en esta materia. Este programa de trabajo deberá producir resultados concretos que contribuyan al primer balance mundial del año 2000. 2023. Hay la acción de sus funciones y establecimiento de su proceso. Damos la bienvenida al diálogo anual sobre acción climática en el océano, que será un espacio vital para que las partes puedan aumentar sus acciones para proteger el océano de los efectos adversos del cambio climático. Lamentamos que después de mucha discusión en el tema de daños y pérdidas no haya un progreso tangible que permita la atención a los impactos reales que viven puntos señalados por el G77 China y sus miembros para que bajo el marco multilateral de una respuesta clara e inequívoca a las necesidades de atender con financiamiento. Señor presidente, coincidimos plenamente con la primera frase de la decisión marco. Reconocemos la importancia de la mejor información científica para la acción climática efectiva y la formulación de políticas. No es una afirmación menor porque señala que pensamos más allá de esta sala y que apostamos por la supervivencia de la humanidad. AILAC, asimismo, felicita a Egipto por su designación como anfitrión de la COP27. Cuenten con nosotros para continuar esta agenda de ambición climática. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for your statement. Now I invite Saudi Arabia to deliver a statement on behalf of Aramco. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank the presidency this year and their team, as well as the secretariat and their team for the great success we have at this time. I have to say, I would like to also thank each and everyone that has been involved in this process for their contribution to the success we had. No doubt that the package of decisions that we have today on the Glasgow Climate Pact, as well as the other decisions in that package, are a great start for a very important year. And we were all hopeful here, coming in with the hope of fully implementing the Paris Agreement, as well making sure that we are also implementing it in a balanced manner. I believe with all those decisions we did so. And I congratulate everyone for that. And we look forward to see everyone in Glasgow to continue this journey. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now I give the floor to India to deliver a statement on behalf of BASIC. You have the floor.
Mr. President, India has the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of BASIC Group, comprising of Brazil, South Africa, India, and China. We align ourselves with the statement made by the Republic of Guinea on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Mr. President, the BASIC Group thanks the Presidency for their dedicated efforts in organizing COP26, even during these challenging times of COVID-19 pandemic. We thank representatives of civil society organizations and the media for bringing the voices of those who are most impacted by the climate change at the forefront. The BASIC Group is committed towards making COP26 a success. We recognize the need of moving forward and reaching concrete result in Glasgow at COP26. For this, we have shown maximum flexibility to help arrive at the outcome that is acceptable for all. The BASIC countries have committed themselves to ambitious climate actions, notwithstanding the serious developmental challenges we face at home. We need to see developed countries step forward to deliver not just on their mitigation pledges, but fast-track finance, technology transfer, and capacity building flows to developing countries. COP26 need to be remembered as the COP where a step change in financial support for developing countries from developed countries was initiated. There has been progress on finance matters. We are also deeply concerned that we still do not see a predictable and at scale funding pipeline for adaptation, Given that a private sector cannot be expected to lead on adaptation financing, we are, however, seeing some encouraging signal that a process may begin towards operationalizing the global goal of adaptation. Frequent call on updation of NDC must not become a norm. It must be as per the provision of multilaterally agreed process in Paris Agreement. The basic group of countries recognize the importance of operationalization of the Article 6 mechanisms under 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8. We believe cooperation is at the center of these market and non-market approaches. The basic group has come forward with significantly enhanced ambition and exhibited a positive outlook in these discussions. In all our future collective endeavors to address climate change, the basic group remains committed to engaging positively and constructively in participatory and inclusive process. Finally, we would like to welcome the incoming presidency of Egypt for COP27. We look forward to working under the Egyptian leadership and pledge our full support to the incoming presidency. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now I invite Argentina to deliver a statement on behalf of you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, associating ourselves with the statement made by the chair of the G77 and China. First of all, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to the Scottish people and the city of Glasgow for receiving us at their home. Their kindness has kept our spirit high during this COP and contributed to its successful conclusion. We arrived in Glasgow 2 weeks ago with a clear message from science and from our people. Climate change is real and requires urgent action now. We have all worked hard to respond to that call. We thank the efforts by the COP26 presidency for its successful guidance, and we thank all parties for the flexibility and spirit of compromise. This has allowed us to reach agreements on many issues that were pending. We celebrate the finalization of the rulebook of the Paris Agreement. We are pleased to see that Article 6 will provide both market and non-market tools to facilitate parties' implementation of NDCs. These mechanisms will also allow a new channel of international finance for developing countries' mitigation and adaptation efforts while ensuring environmental integrity. Regarding transparency, we have reached a strong outcome that will allow us to assess whether or not we are at the right level of ambition. The results take into consideration the reporting flexibilities and the appropriate financial, technical, and capacity building support needed by developing countries in light of our capacities. On finance, we have seen some progress, but delivering on the $100 billion is still a pending issue that affects the world's trust in this negotiation process. We expect that COP27 will bring an honest discussion among developed and developing countries on the need to align financial flows with the Paris Agreement goals. We celebrate the recognition of the need to scale up finance for adaptation. We hope that this will result in substantive new and additional funds for implementation. And on loss and damage, we would have expected to see more ambitious progress. We will continue to strongly support the development of this agenda item. This is of great importance to the 6 billion people living in developing countries that are already suffering the adverse effects of climate change. ABU will also continue working on many cross-cutting issues that are crucial to our convention. The gender and human rights approaches, as well as the action for climate empowerment, are fundamental pillars that we need to strengthen in the fight against climate change. Dear colleagues, climate action is not only an option, but a need for economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic. As we leave this COP, we will return to our countries, where real people continue to struggle for a better life on our planet. Let's continue with a renewed commitment to work for them, ensure the just transition towards sustainable development that the world is waiting for. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Glasgow. Thank you all.
Thank you for your statement. Now I give the floor to Pakistan. Pakistan, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable COP President, Executive Secretary, UNFCCC, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I align myself with the statement delivered by the distinguished delegate of Guinea on behalf of G77 and China, and I wish to make few remarks in my national capacity. I would like to thank the government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for hosting this COP in this beautiful city of Glasgow. I would also like to congratulate Egypt on hosting COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh next year. Mr. President, Pakistan has firmly maintained an abiding commitment to uphold international cooperation through multilateralism, with the UN and the Convention on Climate Change, as well as its subsidiary bodies, play a central role in addressing climate emergency. The challenge is so immense that no one country can handle this crisis alone, and it can only be defeated by collective response. The IPCC's August 2021 report is a clarion call that human activities have caused around 1.1 degrees Celsius of global warming and has impacted every region in the world. Mr. President, there is a dire need to urgently enhance ambitions and actions in relation to mitigation and adaptation. At the same time, finance mobilization, technology transfer, and capacity building needs for
less evidence, less facts, less Mother Nature messages than we have had in the last years. And so those plans, if they were fully implemented, you'd still have a rise of the Earth's temperature to about 3-point-something degrees, if not more, higher, 4. So Paris was a signal in the marketplace, not a guarantee that we wouldn't be able to hold the Earth's temperature rise to well below 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. But now here in Glasgow, we have 65% of global GDP committed to real plans that have been certified by the IPCC or by the IEA or by various modelers that you know, from Rhodium to Climate Action to others. They've been certified to say, yes, if you do all those things, you can keep 1.5 degrees alive. And as a result of what took place here with nations that have never considered even having the word coal in a plan, where it remains, even today, after what took place, coal and the phase down of coal is on the books. It's part of the decision. And you have to phase down coal before you can, quote, end coal. So this is a beginning of something. I think, we always knew that Glasgow was not the finish line. And anybody who thought it was doesn't understand the challenge that we had. Glasgow, was never going to be that we were going to come to Glasgow and everybody was going to have a decision that was somehow going to end the crisis or, automatically put us on the path we have to go. So I would say that, Paris built the arena and Glasgow starts the race. And tonight, the starting gun was fired. We have about 9 years within which to make those critical decisions we were warned about in 2018 by the IPCC, and we have the years in this decade, the decisive decade, in order to cut 45% of global emissions to hold on to the 1.5. Now, we raised ambition here in Glasgow. This was not business as usual. I've been attending these meetings since 1992, when we first created this entire process. And the story here is not told only through the NDCs, as critical as they are. The NDCs were the basic tool that Paris did create. But the fact is that we saw the full coalition that we need come together here in Glasgow and make a commitment. And that includes civil society, private sector, NGOs, activists, young people, older people, people from all over the world demonstrating and pushing. And the result is that we had tribal and indigenous representatives here in force demanding a just transition, which is vital, and demanding environmental justice, which is critical to any approach. So we had a series of objectives before we came here. First, thanks to many months of negotiations, the objective we had of finalizing that so-called archaic name, the rule book, but the famous or infamous, depending how you look at it, rule book, get completed here, folks. That was a goal. And it's hard. It was really hard to be able to do that. There was tough negotiations over things that matter in the context of economy and trade and people's beliefs about how they should behave in this process. Transparency rules, how often we report, how we report, all of those things, progress in order to measure where we're going with the NDCs and what their meaning is. We set out to raise ambition. And on our team, we traveled the world to do that. Raised ambition with Indonesia, raised ambition with South Africa, raised ambition with Japan, with South Korea, our colleagues in Canada, raised ambition in terms of Saudi Arabia and Brazil. And so the majority of the 20 largest economies in the world, which are responsible for 80% of all the emissions, are among those committed to achieve the 1.5 degrees. And what we believe we're doing in that raising of ambition is setting a template for what we take out to other countries all around the world. So rule book, ambition. Third, Glasgow gives us a very clear blueprint going forward for the things we need to do from now through 2030 and 2030 through 2050. And it embraces keeping 1.5 degrees alive. It sets out a lot of steps in that regard. While some people may have wanted even stronger language, the text that we agreed to has the first ever, believe it or not, mention of coal and fossil fuel subsidies. That's never happened. And it's happened in a way that big countries that have been dependent on coal have signed on to phasing down. Now, does that mean it's phased down? No. That's the follow-up. That's the accountability. That's the reporting. But we emerge from Glasgow having dramatically raised the world's ambition to solve this challenge in this decade and beyond. And we will have measurements starting now, every month, every day, every period of the year, each year going forward. And we have a formal stock take, as you all know, in 2023. So there is accountability built into what happened here in Glasgow. Fourth, we focused on the critical issue of adaptation. And President Biden started the week off with his commitment to adaptation, creating the president's emergency plan for adaptation and resilience and putting $3 billion into it day one. That's how we started this COP. And we gladly join in supporting the doubling of funding for adaptation because it's needed. We also obviously know, and we also have a clear path, as I think you know, on the 100 billion. We are on track to fulfill that obligation, and it will go out into the future year after year, and there'll be more than 100 billion in those years. Finally, finance. More broadly, we help to ensure that developed countries are going to meet their commitments, and just as importantly, they're going to bring business into this fight. I repeat this. No government in the world has enough money in their budget or outside of it publicly to be able to effect the transition we need to make. We honor and embrace the reality that the UN Finance Gap Report says that we have a gap of some 2.6 to $4.6 trillion a year for the next 30 years. Where's that money going to come from? So since we know it's not going to come from the government, we have to bring it to the table from the places where it is. And that's principally the private sector. And the private sector here was in a force that we have never seen before, with a clear path forward for how we can achieve this. We have to bring, I'm not saying to you that I think there's 135 trillion automatically going to get invested. I don't, a lot of that money is not going to be able to be deployed. But there are trillions of dollars which I do know can and will be deployed. And it's in a significant amount. And the 6 largest banks in America, just among themselves, have committed that they're going to invest some 4.16 trillion. And then when you add some asset managers, you're quickly up to 6, 7, 8 trillion that we know of for the next 10 years, just from a few American financial institutions. And what we're now talking about with those CEOs and leaders is how do we guarantee that money is really going to get deployed? And we are committed to work as a partner with individual countries. We already have signed up to our partnership with India to help deploy their 450 gigawatts of renewable. And we have finance and technology we're ready to bring to the table. And we also bring, hopefully, blended finance and to help de-risk and take first loss and make it possible for those investments to go forward. That's a critical component. This is not a one-way street. It's not just financial institutions that are going to put their money on the table. It's also governments that need to step up to streamline decision-making, guarantee access to land for solar and wind, create transmission. So it's a huge effort by all of us to try to fulfill our possibilities that come out of this. So as again, I say, this is the beginning of that 10-year sprint. The IPCC report is clear about what we have to do. We've done a lot of things on the sidelines together with the EU as a critical partner. We announced the global methane pledge, and that is 70% of global economy. 70% of the global economy is in that 108 countries. And their pledge to me immediately to reduce emission, which is the largest single grab you can get to reduce emissions fast. In addition, let me say a word about the US-China agreement. I've read in a few places, well, it's shorter on details, et cetera. Actually, it's not. It depends on what you look at in terms of the whole piece of it. But paragraph 6 of that agreement makes it crystal clear that what we're doing is with a view to our cooperation producing a reduction in emissions and even creating goals and targets and numbers. And what we plan to do with experts that come together from both sides as we work together is be able to accelerate the deployment of this technology and the effort to reduce those emissions. We're the 2 largest economies in the world, and we're going to work together to raise climate ambition in the course of this decade. And specifically, China put forward a willingness to announce next year, time certain, in the year, a climate action plan that is ambitious, that will be reported to the COP 27 next year in November. That's a date, that's a detail, that's certain. In addition, China committed, as they did today, even though there was a change on the focus, China still is signed up in the COP decision to phase down coal, unabated coal, and to move to accelerate, if possible, this transition. And they've committed that to us too, and they announced a specific time frame for when that begins, and we commence for best efforts and hopefully, because they say so, they're going to make their best efforts to accelerate that, to do it earlier, which means we have the potential with China for the first time to work together to actually beat the schedule that they currently put out. So finally, I want to get into your questions. We rejoined the High Ambition Coalition, which President Trump took us out of. We were part of its foundation. Now we're back in. We committed to protecting millions of acres of forest and oceans. 85% of the global forests are now committed to anti-deforestation efforts by 2030. That's a detail. We're working with Denmark, and we're racing towards a zero carbon shipping. As a result, we announced, obviously, here in Glasgow, we took President Biden launched PREPARE, which is the president's emergency plan for adaptation. I mentioned it earlier. And in April, we doubled our commitment to help vulnerable countries be able to manage the transition. And working together with our partners, we are moving forward on the allocation of funds for other initiatives also. I might add that because some of the money is in the infrastructure bill that passed, like 500,000 charging stations and so forth. Some of the money is in the reconciliation. But our national laboratories are potentially on the brink of getting an infusion of funds that are allocated for busting the barriers that are in front of us with respect to the research necessary for rapid deployment of new. You all know, obviously, that the boardroom discussions around the world because of ESG have changed, and with disclosure much on people's minds, it's possible that the allocation of capital is going to be very different as people are required to look down the road at their own investments and the consequences of climate on those investments. So my friends, here's, Glasgow. I don't know how many of you got out. I've been able to get to a couple of the events that were off campus, so to speak. And I went to a few dinners, and it's a beautiful old industrial city, reminding me much of some of the cities in Massachusetts that I had the privilege of representing. A lot of the same texture.
Of EIG. We also join thanking to the UK presidency for excellent leadership during this COP and through presidency initiatives, including warm
and Google and Amazon and others here, assets of more than $8 trillion. And together they are already implementing major decisions like buying electric fleets, trucks, big orders of trucks that are electric, making the commitment. United Airlines committed that a certain percentage of their fuel that they sell will be 85% emissions free, even though the technology isn't completely there. They're going to strive for it. And companies have agreed they're going to only buy tickets on airlines that are doing that have that 5%. So they know there's a buyer there. And the same thing with steel. Volvo announced 10% of its steel is going to be purchased, will be green steel for the fabrication of their cars. And there are, Maersk said that they had ordered 8 new ships, all carbon free. So a lot is going to be happening, and the implementation is the key. As we leave Glasgow, our code word is going to be implementation, follow up, follow through. And we're going to spend as much effort as we can to try to make that happen. So, you know, I got to tell you, I had the privilege of signing the Paris Agreement at the UN. Maybe some of you were there, but I think you saw the picture of my granddaughter sitting on my knee. And she was 2 years old then. She has a sister now. And, you know, she deserves to be able to have answers to questions like, am I going to have clean water? What's going to happen with climate? Where are we heading? And so, you know, I really believe that that we all have to answer those questions for all of our kids around the world. We came closer today to answering some of them, not all of them. There is still a gap in the emissions that have to be reduced. It is still a daunting task. There's a heavy lift ahead. But what we know is, given the proposals that have been put on the table, given the commitments that have been made, if we do them all, according to several reputable modeling, we would be at 1.8 degrees by 2050. And we could be at 2.4 or so, or higher, 2.6, by 2030. I believe we're going to accelerate. It's just my belief. I think we're going to have breakthroughs in technology. I think people are going to find it easier to do some of those things than they think. And so I believe that, you know, those of us who watch this progression of our planet growing more and more unstable and more polluted, and that's what it is. It's pollution. Greenhouse gases are pollution. Coal that travels around the world in the atmosphere and falls in the ocean and warms it and acidifies it is pollution. And what we need to do is live pollution free. I think people all around the world believe that. So that's our choice. I think thanks to the work here in Glasgow, the goals that we're setting for ourselves are much, much closer than they were, much closer than when we came here. And I think we're going to get closer and closer as a result, providing we implement and follow through. So happy to answer questions. Let me turn to Kevin Keane. Kevin Keane, BBC Scotland. You got a mic so that I can hopefully actually hear.
Thank you. Last week, 100,000 people marched on the streets of this city demanding urgent action from you and other leaders. This week, they've watched an agreement being systematically watered down. How do you convince those people that what they've ended up with is actually urgent action?
Well, first of all, I urge them to read it and to actually analyze it and study it. You know, some people obviously pronounced failure before we'd even sat down and had full negotiations. But I think that the reality is that what has happened here is very significant. Is it everything everybody wanted in every place? No. Did I appreciate that we had to adjust one thing tonight in a very unusual way? No, but if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have an agreement. That's the choice. And sometimes you face tough choices in this business. We had a choice between whether or not we leave Glasgow with all these other things that we've accomplished and whether or not we change a word that says, instead of, you know, that still says that we got to phase it down. I'll take phase it down and fight next year as we go into, you know, on through the next year to get where we need to go. So it still says, you know, phase down, unabated coal power. That's very clearly in here. And if we start doing that and keep pushing, we're going to get to the next layer. But I disagree, you know, the systematic way. You look at the mitigation chapter in this, it's stronger than anything we've ever put out. You look at the adaptation, bigger, stronger than anything we've ever put out. You look at the adaptation finance, stronger, bigger, doubling the amount. That's not nothing. That's not business as usual. So I really think people have to take a hard look at this and recognize that this is a very aggressive increasing of ambition. And you have countries that haven't even sometimes taken part wholly and excitedly in the process. And so now they are. We have Saudi Arabia, which is an oil producing. When you say Saudi Arabia, you think oil and oil production. But Saudi Arabia signed up to a major green hydrogen project in the desert that could really, if it followed through on, fuel through pipelines, Europe, Africa. That's possible. And they've also committed to do a major deployment of renewable energy, which we know they can do. So these are real changes, folks. And I'm very hopeful about it in terms of the long run. Brady Dennis, Washington Post.
Thanks, Secretary Kerry. You mentioned adaptation, and I noticed that you made a point to talk about that in your remarks in the final session today, and to reassure countries that that funding would be there, especially from the United States. And I want to ask you, how are you able to have such confidence that those billions will show up year after year, especially in a nation like ours that has a divided Congress where a lot of that funding will have to come from? And what have you told other countries this week who are seriously concerned, that those promises haven't been fulfilled in the past,
Right,
that they will be in the future?
Well, I can speak for the next 3 years, or at least through next year, depending on what happens in the midterms. But my hope is that people are increasingly becoming more and more aware of the reality of what is happening in climate change. This is not a partisan issue, folks. There is no Republican label or Democrat label on a fire, on a mudslide, on people drowning in New York, on people freezing to death in Texas, on the farms that have been flooded in South Dakota or Minnesota or other parts of America. This just, look at the water drought that people are facing in four corners now, with California, Nevada, Colorado, and Arizona. It's dire. And I think that Mother Nature is going to sustain the seriousness of purpose in Republican and Democrat alike. It's just my personal belief, and I think that that's growing as a need. I also believe that no politician can turn this back. If in the future someone runs for president and says, I don't like climate crisis, we're not going to do this, guess what? Ford Motor Company and General Motors are going to retool their entire plants. And they've made a commitment that by 2030, they're only going to produce electric vehicles. I mean, they'll be producing 50% of their vehicles with the electric. And by 2035, they've publicly, this isn't the government, this is a private company, the vaunted, GM, part of America, deeply, says they are going to be producing only electric at that point in time. So I really think that these trillions of dollars that are already committed to moving. I saw a thing on TV last night briefly, a news show, that was talking about whether or not it was wise to invest and how good an investment was it in these very big funds that are now focused on climate. And guess what? They're making enormous returns. They're doing better than a lot of other funds and other focus. So I think, at your peril, will people in politics avoid the reality of what's transforming in the economy? The economy is making the decision about coal in America and in Europe and other parts of the world. Not the government. We don't have a government shutdown, but they're not building them. They are shutting down. Why? Because they're more expensive and they bring different kinds of problems. So I think we have, nobody can stand anywhere and guarantee you something for the eternity or for 5 years, 10 years. I can't do that. But I can tell you for the years that I know of, that's going to continue. And if it doesn't continue, then other leaders and other players are going to have to step up and help solve that problem when it happens. I got somebody else as lead out, do a couple of others afterwards. Yeah, Gene Chudley. E&E. Go ahead. We'll get a mic right over there. And then Tim Puko will be next after that, and then I'll open it up for.
Thanks for doing
Go
this.
ahead.
So President Biden has made climate justice and especially support for frontline communities a major hallmark of his environmental policy, including financial support through the Justice 40 initiative. Why is the US position here on loss and damage not a contradiction of that principle, given that these are the people around the world who are the frontline communities?
What do you mean, our position on?
The position of not creating a facility that would quickly.
We supported creating a facility. We supported loss and damage. We signed off on it. What we don't support, well, we support loss and damage, but what we think is in the next few years, we have to work through what is this all about? Where, how much money needed for what? What are the what's the legality of it? You know, if the Santiago network, which we supported setting up, we supported it in Naples, we supported it here, and we put money into it. We put $50 billion just a few days ago, I announced it, into the adaptation fund. And so we do support it. And we agreed to provide financing for the Santiago network's work on technical standards, which is important. And we want to do that to make sure it has resources, but also to make sure that this is going forward in a thoughtful, sensitive way. And in my comments just now in the plenary, I made certain to address the concerns of people who are deeply concerned about loss and damage, that we were looking forward to being part of the discourse within the facility process that's been set up. But obviously, an increase in resources ultimately is going to be necessary for people on the front lines. We think that could be delivered more efficiently, probably through some existing channels, but we also remain always thoughtful about the issue of liability and so where this goes. So we need the dialogue to work through how is this going to be managed going forward. But loss and damage is on the map and serious, and I think we were as serious about it as a lot of other folks here. Tim.
Thanks so much for doing this. You made some references to different regulatory actions that the administration has taken, cars, methane. Some of that is either voluntary or proposals that are only in their earliest stages. Congress has taken, 11 months now, and has not passed the policies that the administration needs to meet its goal for reducing emissions by half by 2030. And so now we have in this new deal accelerated timelines for new commitments. I just want you to explain, considering how long it's taken, and we still don't have the policies you need in place to do the first commitment, that in just a few months, the US is going to come back and credibly make an even more aggressive commitment.
Congress is always exercising its prerogative of working through the democratic process with 100 senators and 435 members of the House. And you have less independence in the House than you have in the Senate, but that's playing out. And from what I understand, the president has, obviously I'm locked up here and I'm not there day to day for the currency, and I don't know exactly where the negotiations are at this moment, but I know when President Biden is here, he's very, very fixated on it and hopeful that in the next days, next weeks, this is going to happen. Now, obviously, if it doesn't happen, that's a challenge for us. But I have confidence Congress is, going to move on this. And Nancy Pelosi made that very clear to me when she was here. So I'm not going to second guess it. I'm not there. I don't have enough input right now to express any sense of where it's going to wind up, how it comes out. But I have confidence, basically, generically, that Congress will do its part and the president will do his part, and that we will move forward on this. And I really believe that's going to happen. I don't know.
It's going to come back with a new NDC that's even more aggressive within, 11,
Well,
12
that
months time.
depends. You don't automatically have to come back with a new NDC. That's not the language. You have to review it, and as necessary, you make a judgment about it. We're doing a lot at home right now. A lot of things happening just with the marketplace. And you forget, even when Donald Trump was president, and he pulled out of Paris, and he pulled the money out, and he ridiculed the concept. Even during that period of time, 37 governors and District of Columbia continued to apply their renewable portfolio laws. And during that period of time, about 75% of the new electricity that came online in the United States under Donald Trump was from renewables. So America isn't so far behind, even though they didn't have a president or a budget behind them, because the mayors and the governors are doing things all across our country. And I think, and now we have corporations added to that. So is that President Biden's preferred scenario? No, of course not. And he's going to fight for this legislation, and I believe he's going to get it. Thank you. Yeah.
Seth Borenstein, AP. In terms of, just to follow up on that, in paragraph 29, it does ask countries to come back next year with a stronger NDC. So given that, given the agreement, US-China agreement, what do you expect to come from the US? What do you expect to come from China for next year and the world? How much do you have to pick up the pace in the race that you are referring to? Does it have to speed up, as most outside experts say, and how fast?
Well, I don't know the precise number as I stand here tonight. I can't tell you exactly what it is for either of us, China or us. That's part of the purpose of this working group, is to be able to jointly understand where we are, what the measurements are, what's the input, make judgments about where we have to go and how fast. But I don't need to know a lot of the numbers to know we're behind. We're all behind, way behind where we have to be. So we have to kick this thing into much higher gear. And that's for all players. And obviously, the United States and China are about 40% of all the emissions. We've got to really demonstrate by example that we're serious about it. That's one of the reasons why I was so encouraged by the breakthrough with China, because heretofore, for months, we've been negotiating with China since February. We've had about 35 meetings of one kind or another, mostly virtual, but twice I went to China, 2 days at a time. And then we met in London the week before we came in here. We had 2 days of meetings in London. And it wasn't until here that we finally really kind of got in a place. Well, we started in London, but we carried it on here where we were able to connect and get an agreement. And in that agreement, I'm encouraged that our experts are going to help us to be able to agree on what the numbers are, agree on what the best way to deal with it is, and both hopefully be responsible coming back with, if we need to, an increased NDC. Now, China did up its NDC this year slightly. We would have loved it to have been much stronger and more, but at least in this working process we've established, we have a shot at getting much more precise and much more active together in doing that. And that may even inform NDCs, not just for us both, but for other people in the world. And we'll see what happens. I'd like China to peak as soon as they can. We've pushed very hard on that. Some people suggest that China may have peaked actually in 2013. And other people suggest that China might be able to peak because they've gone up slightly because of COVID and resurgence and demand, maybe by 2023, 24 is reasonable to anticipate. But I don't want to get, that's the important thing is that we're now in that discussion. My hope is that I know President Xi is very focused on this issue. He's personally making decisions about it. CIERRE is a direct line to President Xi, as I do to President Biden. And my hope is that as the two presidents meet this next week, they will hopefully even build on what we've been talking about. And what's the call that? Let's take pertains to this, but I gotta hold off for a minute. I really think, I'm not trying to sell this to you. I think in the structure that's been set up, in the dialogue that is now created, in the commitments that are on the table, in the presence of the private sector, with the NGO interest and with the extraordinary public expression, particularly from young people in the streets of the world, I think Glasgow represents a major shift point. Now, that's today. Let's see where we are in a few months. Let's see what's happening. I'm operating on gut and the feel of having been here, what I think happened here. But we have to implement. Make no mistake about it. To make this not words on a paper, to make it more than the words that have been criticized and legitimately in a lot of cases, because a lot of promises have been broken. We need to implement. We need to go faster. We need to go further, quicker. And some people need to get more serious about this. And so that's the challenge. But it's clearly been put on the table by almost 200 countries that are here today. And we'll see where we go. I think we got time for about one more, folks, according to the time frame I'm allotted here. Is that correct? Somewhere in there. So we got to do one more, and then I'm out of here. Lisa, you get the last shot here.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Just going back to Seth's question about the revisiting of targets. I mean, as you mentioned, ahead of Glasgow, a number of countries did update their NDCs, but they didn't really increase their ambition. And now you're saying that the US might, but not necessarily increase its NDC next year. Can you explain why we should expect next year to be
No, I
any
don't
different?
expect that. It's the language is necessary. I don't expect that it's going to be necessary because our ambitious goal is 50 to 52%, thanks to Gina McCarthy, and that's stretching the limits right now. We need to see what's doable. But if we don't get there, then we still need to, as a matter of responsibility, figure out how we're going to get the 45% minimum reduction over the 10 years.
But forgive me, how does this agreement put pressure really on other countries to increase their ambition?
The only way that pressure is exerted here, Lisa, is the acceptance of moral and public responsibility for actions. And the process by which this gathering, you're all here, you're focused on countries, and I don't think a lot of countries enjoy reading about themselves in any of your publications or seeing themselves on TV being pilloried for setting it up so that people are going to die and they're going to be polluted and they're going to have to live lesser lives, and crises are going to grow, and floods are going to be more frequent and storms will be more intense, because that's the alternative. And countries that do not step up, I believe, will become, the subject matter of very significant focus on the internet, on social media. That's a huge level of accountability, frankly, together with newspapers and television and the rest of the process. But other things that matter are going to be peer pressure. Countries around the country, what they're doing. So this process does not establish, and it cannot establish, and I don't know any country that specifically wants to be subject to some kind of a police force or something This is one of those things that has to be compelling because of the substance and compelling because of the commitments you make and compelling because of the public scrutiny that holds you accountable to your own promises. And that can be effective. That's what brought us to Glasgow, folks. That's what created Paris. There's a reason these cops are up to number 26 and keep on going. And that is because there is a thirst for accountability and for action in this arena. And next year, there is already you guys can start writing about COP 27. It's going to be in Egypt. And then COP 28. And those are the accountability moments. And that's why I said, this is the 10-year start. You know, we're out of the starting blocks here. That's what happened here. We're in the race. And every moment, we're going to be reporting on and thinking about and making judgments about where we are in that race. And it's a long haul. It's 9 years or so. Not precisely. No scientist will tell you, they can tell you exactly the month or the day or the year, but it's in that vicinity that they make a judgment. And I hope to God that they've given it a little bit of a grace period because we're behind. That was the last question. I'm so sorry, but you all must be bleary-eyed by now. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Outcomes of Coronavia translated into national plans for the implementation of the Paris Agreement on the ground. Dear Mr. President, as
of the 1.7 billion US dollars for indigenous-led
solutions for forest and lands protection, and look forward to designing our own inclusive mechanism benefiting all 7 sociocultural regions. Our positive relationship with the UK presidency resulted in Indigenous Pavilion and our dialogue with the presidency. We welcome the inclusion of the rights of Indigenous peoples in some provisions of the Article 6. However, we wanted to see an independent grievance mechanism, not a process in Article 6.4. We are also dismayed at the exclusion of our rights in activity billion US dollars implementation for Indigenous-led, in particular the consultation for forest and lands protection, and look forward to designing our own inclusive international standards benefiting and ensure compliance with the rights of Indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent. Our positive relationship with the UK presidency resulted in the inclusion of free pavilion and our dialogue with women and gender presidency and the Yongo. We welcome the inclusion of the rights and welcome the peoples in some provisions of the gender and climate change agenda. However, the rights of Indigenous women must be respected in climate finance, not in all climate actions. Our contributions are rooted in our knowledge at the exclusion of our rights in activities material billion US dollars with our natural Indigenous-led, in particular the consultation for forest and lands protection, and look forward to designing our own applicable international benefiting and ensure compliance every loss of our rights hinders our ability to maintain and strengthen our invaluable knowledge. Thank you for the SUBSA and SPL chairs and our dialogue with women presidency and climate champions. We welcome the inclusion of the right. Welcome to continuing our work with the gender and presidency, and we welcome new collaboration. The rights of Indigenous women must be respected in climate finance, not in all climate actions. Our contributions are rooted in our knowledge at the exclusion of our rights in activities material billion US dollars with our natural Indigenous-led, in particular the consultation for forest and lands protection, and look forward to designing our own applicable mechanisms benefiting and ensure compliance every loss of our rights hinders our ability to maintain and strengthen our invaluable knowledge. Thank you for the SUBSA and SPL chairs and our dialogue with women presidency and climate change. We welcome the inclusion of the right. Welcome to continuing our work with the gender and presidency, and we welcome new collaboration. Rights of Indigenous women must be respected in climate finance, not in all climate actions. Our contributions are rooted in our knowledge at the exclusion of our rights in $1.7 billion US dollars with our natural Indigenous-led, in particular the consultation for forest and lands protection, and forward to designing our own applicable mechanisms benefiting and ensure compliance every loss of our rights hinders our ability to maintain and strengthen our invaluable knowledge. Thank you for the SUBSA
to climate emergency and deliver Paris Agreement. However, we are disappointed and concerned on the fact that this COP26 did not result in a meaningful outcome on loss and damage. The COP27 shall take place in Africa, the youngest and most urbanizing continent. That COP should consider the aspects of demographic dividend, sustainable urbanization and adaptation to focus on the role of cities in climate change and how they can finance their green plans. Rwanda has promoted investments in green economies, green infrastructure, and green local government plans with equitable sharing of the available meager resources for climate finance. The elaboration of submitted nationally determined contributions has been participatory, and that process allows us to localize them along with the SDGs. Discussions here at COP26 showed that the LGMA in Africa and the Global South are committed and they can do. However, there is a need for partnership and investments from the Global North because climate change is a shared responsibility. I thank you for kind attention.
Thank you for your statement. Now, I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of research and independent non-governmental organizations. You have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the research and independent NGOs. My name is Daniel Dominguez. I'm a Marshall Scholar at the University of Glasgow and a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow at Colorado State University. One of the great strengths of the research community is that we are engaged in partnerships with policy and decision makers and stand at the ready to do more to advance on the urgent challenges we have heard about from the IPCC and again here in Glasgow. We commend the explicit recognition of the importance of science in decision making in the cover decision and stand ready to respond to the call for researchers. We can bring together researchers from the natural and social sciences, the arts and humanities, and enrich our research with traditional knowledge, local communities, and youth perspectives for robust engagement and action. And as you know, action, and in particular, evidence-based action, is what is needed most right now. With the coronavirus pandemic, we have seen what can be accomplished when governments, community leaders, civil society representatives, the scientific community, and citizens work together to meet a common goal. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the research community continues to conduct research, educate, and train young scientists. And in doing so, we have become more resilient to the changing dynamics of the global stage. We also have adapted and responded to knowledge needs in real time. As a result, we are using our higher capability to conduct active climate change research across disciplines and to help bridge the gap between awareness and action. We encourage governmental organizations to continue to support collaboration between researchers in different nations and disciplines. It is vital to continue to build the capacity of the next generation of scientists, the academic capabilities of least developed countries, and non-traditional educational programs that allow them to engage in climate change research and solutions. As a young scientist supported by 2 government institutions, I can attest that when you invite us to collaborate across national lines and in these programs, the research community can better meet the needs of all concerned. The world has recognized climate change science. It is time to innovate, adapt, and create solutions to human health, social justice, the economy, governance, and the natural and life science impacts of climate change. In closing, the research and independent non-governmental organizations emphasize and reiterate our commitment in partnering with you to support you as you address these challenges and to accelerate solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of trade unions, non-governmental organizations. You have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
President, Excellencies, delegates and observers. I'm Richard Hardy, National Secretary for the Trade Union Prospect in Scotland, a member of the General Council of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, and I was a member of the Scottish Government's groundbreaking Just Transition Commission. I'm speaking today on behalf of 210 million workers in 165 countries represented by the global trade union movement. Mr. President, no country has ever had so much time to prepare for a COP. Never have the challenges been clearer than in this year. Never have the calls for action from scientists, young people, indigenous communities, women, citizens, activists, and the affected and threatened workers in all the corners of the world been louder. And yet, as the voice of the workers, we are truly puzzled. To whom have you been listening in the run-up to this COP? How has the outcome on ambition, finance, responsibility, and inclusion fallen so short? We believe that this deal will allow countries and companies to trade away our hope for a safe future. The loopholes in the Article 6 mechanisms will undermine the deep and fast decarbonisation that we all need. Developing countries are going home without guarantees for the money that is owed them. There are no concrete mechanisms to catch up for the previous promises of $100 billion a year, only talks about a long-term finance goal, only limited progress on adaptation, and above all, no loss and damage finance instrument. This is plainly shameful on the part of those, especially the EU and the US, who have argued against progress on this urgently needed support. Yes, the global trade union movement is happy that just transition has finally found its way into the language used by many parties and observers. We saw and we appreciate the adoption by donor countries of the Declaration on supporting the conditions for a just transition internationally, and we applaud the strong commitments made by signatories. We urge the parties to continue to work towards a just transition one that is about jobs, plans, and investment. Once again, we call on parties to step up their NDCs and create the millions of good quality jobs and good work with your climate policies and measures which the world desperately requires. In closing, I would ask everyone to remember for all future discussion that labour rights are human rights. Unions need a voice at the table in social dialogue processes that deliver on just transition, on jobs, and on investment. This is how we will deliver the climate ambition that is needed. We hoped for greater ambition here in Glasgow, and as we move forward, the global trade union movement demands that we set our sights much, much higher. People power, climate justice.
Thank you for your statement. I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of women and gender non-governmental organizations. You have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mwana Hamisi Singano, an African feminist and a passionate advocate of just, equal, fair, and sustainable world. I speak on behalf of the women and gender constituency, but specifically, I'm making this statement for the ones alive who are not here and for the ones who have been murdered protecting our land. Throughout the existence of UNFCCC, governments have moved from policies to empty pledges, to press releases and proclamations made outside the negotiation process. That means they cannot be held to account for failing to meet them. Net zero pledges without concrete plan to achieve real zero emissions and without adequate legal binding commitment to protect human rights are simply greenwashing, a smoke screen hiding the intent to continue polluting and digging the graves of our present and future generation with impunity. We are tired of waiting for the government to prioritize people and the planet over the profit while so many lives are being impacted and lost. We are out of the time and we are out of the patience. As feminists, African feminists to be specific, indigenous people, grassroots women and leaders, we have been at the center of resistance throughout history. We came to this COP year in, year out with a solution that are sustainable, solution that center food sovereignty, and which embodied understanding of our mutual relationship to the land and ecosystem. And year in, year out, you prioritize large corporations and businesses as usual approaches that mount to nothing but hot air. Chair, our movement for climate justice are louder, bolder, and more powerful than ever. I will promise you, you will hear from us at home, in our communities, and in the policy spaces as we shift policy. And we have learned from this COP not to wait to be invited, to be involved, or to be engaged. In Egypt, we'll show up, we'll claim our agents, and we'll own the process. As African women, allow me to welcome you to Egypt. As you plan your travel to COP27, kindly be reminded, hypocrisy, forced solution, rhetorics, and inaction are strictly prohibited. People power, climate justice.
Thank you for your statement. I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of children and young non-governmental organizations. You have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
I'm Adele from France.
I'm Mark from Hong Kong, and we speak on behalf of YOUNGO, the official children and youth constituency. We would like to thank Italy and other parties that have supported the meaningful inclusion of young people. We are the children and grandchildren you spoke of earlier today. We thank Patricia for being here, but it is unacceptable that most of you have already left the room for dinner and other pleasantries by the time constituencies get the opportunity to speak. We are half of the people that are in the room right now. Stop talking on behalf of us and let us speak for ourselves. Additionally, there has never been a decision focused on the needs and priorities of children and young people. This must be rectified. Next year is the 30th anniversary of the signing of the UNFCCC, and hopefully we will see this addressed by you before COP27. Finally, for the first time in UNFCCC's history, we are having a real seat at a constituted body, the advisory board of the CTCN, together with our sister constituencies, WGC and IPO. And we request for the other constituted bodies to follow. Finally, you concluded, but what kind of decisions have you adopted today? This COP was supposed to be about the future of our planet and us the people, of loss and damage and of human rights. It was claimed to be the most inclusive COP ever, but last minute, intransparent amendments drastically weakened the path to phase out fossil fuel. This does not keep 1.5 alive. 1.5 is dying, and so are people and your children.
After all these years, we continue to urge parties to meet $100 billion promise, not in 2023, but today, and to allocate at least 50% to adaptation and to develop loss and damage finance. This is how you could keep 1.5 alive. We dream of a future when we do not need to fight for our food, our culture, water. You are denying us this basic right to life and are letting greenwashing, cynicism, and politics corrupt these decisions. As half the population of the world, we are half the population of the world. We will continue to fight for climate justice, gender equality, human rights, youth inclusions, that many of you ignored. As global youth, we will take back our right to a safe and healthy environment. We are the generation that takes action and does not wait for COPs to enable change. Everywhere we are in the world, in our local communities, for our lives, our futures, for the sake of our life on Earth, we will hold you accountable. We are taking the lead and what is best for our humanity. And if you don't have the capacity to take the lead yourselves, then do what's right. Follow us. People power, climate justice.
Thank you for your statement. I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of business and industry non-governmental organizations. You have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellency, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sandra Hani from the International Chamber of Commerce, and it is my honor to address you on behalf of the Business and Industry constituency at this meeting. We commend the UK presidency for their leadership, dedication, and intensive work to get us to an agreement. We sincerely thank the presidency and UNFCCC Secretariat for their efforts to stage this conference under difficult public health conditions and to bring it to a successful conclusion. We also thank the UNFCCC Executive Secretary for her remarks on the role that business and other observers have in providing solutions. Business has strongly supported an ambitious outcome at COP26. We have demonstrated our commitment by driving investment, innovation, and action needed, and advancing adaptation and resilience. We are pleased to see this successful step forward
But much work needs to be done, both to limit temperature rise to 1.5 and to finalize the work programs on Article 6. On Article 6, markets have the potential to drive emissions reduction at scale with efficiency, high environmental integrity, and no double counting. We urge UNFCCC parties to commit to continued discussions, engaging the private sector to build confidence in how the Article 6 rules will function in the real economy. Business and industry stands ready to assist in the important further technical work. On finance, we recognize that private and public sector investment will be essential to achieve our shared ambitions. For our part, business and industry stands ready to invest and unlock opportunities. On keeping 1.5 alive, we have seen increased ambition from many parties, but the job is not yet done. Staying within 1.5 and achieving a net zero future by 2050 requires governments to level up and present clear 2030 and 2050 targets and increasingly ambitious NDCs. Business and industry will play our part. We have a key role and responsibility both to push for collective action at COP and at home. Excellency, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Glasgow has been a major milestone on the road to net zero future, but the road is long. We can, we must, and we will accelerate our collective efforts. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Lastly, I would like to give the floor to the other representative speaking on behalf of environmental non-governmental organizations. I give the floor to a representative from Climate Action Network. You have 1 minute. You have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Aissatou Diouf, and I'm speaking on behalf of Climate Action Network. COP26 was supposed to be a crisis COP, a lifeline for the millions of people living in a permanent state of crisis, losing their lives, livelihoods, and homes as a result of climate impacts caused by rich polluting countries and corporations. We came to this COP with the hope that world leaders will respond to the needs of vulnerable people and communities. The science is clear. We are now in the era of climate impacts. Loss and damage caused by climate change is happening already. Climate change is destroying lives and communities now. But yet, you political leaders failed to respond to their plight. We came to Glasgow with a litmus test for you. Provide finance on loss and damage, and you failed. We are disappointed by the betrayal of the rich nation and you, the COP presidency, for being complicit in blocking the proposal by the G77 and China on the creation of the Glasgow Loss and Damage Finance Facility. We are also disappointed with developing countries for not standing strong in the face of this pressure and acting in the interest of their citizens. Incremental progress is not good enough. What we need is concrete commitments to fight the climate emergency. This includes a rapid and equitable phase out, not phase down, all fossil fuels through a just energy transition and revision of national climate targets in line with 1.5 temperature goals. We, the Climate Action Network, a civil society network fighting the climate crisis for many decades, call this COP one of the most exclusionary COPs ever and betrayal of the people. We appreciate the commitment of the Secretariat to review and enhance the observer engagement in this process. We will continue fighting for climate justice. We will do this at home and at the African COP27. That COP, held in a climate vulnerable region, will have to be one that delivers for the vulnerable. People power, climate justice.
Thank you for your statement. I thank NGO constituencies for their statements. Thank you for your statements. We have now reached the end of our joint plenary meeting. This joint meeting is now adjourned.
I now declare open the 14th meeting of COP26. I invite the COP to consider agenda item 18, other matters. Are there any other matters? No. I see no request for the floor. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. I invite the COP to consider agenda item 19, conclusion of the session. Turning to agenda sub item 19A, adoption of the report of the conference on the 26th session. I now invite the Senior Director of Operations at the Secretariat to provide us with the preliminary assessment of the resource implications of decisions adopted by the COP here in Glasgow. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you. Several decisions of this session under 3 agenda items have financial and human resource implications beyond the provisions included in the budget for the biennium 2022-2023. All funding estimates and categorization of activities are preliminary and based on information currently available. Under agenda item 3A, report of subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, funding in the amount of 1.1 million euro will be required for 2022-2023 to support the implementation of the function of local communities and indigenous peoples platform, including meetings, training, workshops, and roundtables. The same estimate was reported under Substa 52- of the subsidiary body, 116,000 euro. Biennium 2022-2023 will be required to support -55 agenda item 18A. The activities under agenda item 3B are recurring or long-term activities falling into category 2 under the method established for the UNFCCC budget as specified in paragraph 36, document FCCC/SBI/2019/4. Category 2 activities would be funded from the core budget in future periods post 2023 if approved by the governing bodies. Under agenda item 8A, long-term climate finance, funding in the amount of 570,000 euro is required to scale up and facilitate the mobilization and effective deployment of climate finance. The nature of these activities is in category 2, long-term or reoccurring as defined in paragraph 36 of document FCCC/SBI/219/4. Category 2 activities would be funded from the core budget in future budget periods post 2023 if approved by the appropriate governing bodies. Under agenda item 12, report of the forum on impact of implementation of response measures, funding in the amount of €26,000, a two-day workshop to further advance work on the implementation of the forum's work plan. Additional costs of $12,500 will be absorbed within existing resources. Same estimate will be provided to CMP 16 under its agenda item 9 and CMA 3, agenda item 11. The nature of this activity is category 3, which is temporary or short-term, as defined in paragraph 36 of document FCCC/SBI/2019/4. Category 3 would be funded from voluntary contributions under the Trust Fund for Supplementary Activities. Resource requirements in 2024 and beyond resulting from decisions taken at this session will be treated in line with established budgetary processes. We hope that the Secretariat can count on the continued support of parties to provide adequate and timely supplementary funding for the activities to be undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaya. The draft report is contained in document FCCC/CP/2021/L2. I invite the COP to adopt the draft report on the understanding that the rapporteur, with the assistance of the Secretariat, will complete the report and make it available to all parties. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. This brings us to the end of the COP. I sincerely thank you for all your hard work over many long hours to reach a successful outcome here at COP26 in Glasgow. I declare the 26th session of the Conference of Parties closed. I now open the 12th meeting of CMP 16. I invite the CMP to consider agenda item 14, other matters. Are there any other matters? I see no request for the floor. I invite CMP to consider agenda item 16, conclusion of the session. I invite the CMP to consider agenda items, sub-items 15A, adoption of the report of the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of parties to the Kyoto Protocol on its 16th session. I now invite the Secretariat to provide us with the preliminary assessment of the resource implications of the decisions adopted by CMP here in Glasgow. Chaya, you have the floor.
Thank you. One decision adopted by CMP at this session has budgetary implications beyond the provisions included in the budget for the biennium 2022-2023. The financial estimates and categorization of activities is preliminary and based on currently available information. Under agenda item 9, report of the Forum on the impact of implementation of response measures, supplementary funding in the amount of €26,000 will be required in 2022 to organize a two-day workshop to further advance the implementation of the Forum's work plan. Additional staff costs of €12,500 will be absorbed within existing resources for implementation of these activities. The same estimate is provided to the COP and the CMA under respective agenda items. The nature of this activity is category 3, which is temporary or short-term, as defined in paragraph 36 of document FCCC/SBI/2019/4. Category 3 activities would be funded from voluntary contribution under the Trust Fund for Supplementary Activities. We hope that the Secretariat can count on to provide adequate and timely supplementary funding.
Thank you very much. The draft report is contained in document FCCC/KP/CMP/2021 L1. I invite the CMP to adopt the draft report on the understanding that the rapporteur, with the assistance of the Secretariat, will complete the report and make it available to all parties. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. This brings us to the end of CMP. I declare the 16th session of the Conference of Parties serving as meeting of parties. I now open the 14th meeting of CMA 3. I invite the CMA to consider agenda item 16, other matters. Are there any other matters? I see no request for the floor. I invite the CMA to consider agenda item 17, conclusion of the session. I invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 17A, adoption of the report of the Conference of the Parties serving as meeting of parties to the Paris Agreement on the third session of its third session. I now invite Senior Director for Operations to provide us with the preliminary assessment of the resource implication of the decisions adopted by the CMA here in Glasgow. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you. Several decisions adopted by the CMA at the session under 10 agenda items have budgetary implications beyond the provision included in the budget for the biennium 2022-2023. All funding estimates and categorization of activities are preliminary and based on information currently available. Under agenda item 2, organizational matters, supplementary funding in the amount of €430 will be required in 2022 and €380,000 will be required in 2023 to update the synthesis report on nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Funding in the amount of €1.23 million will be required for the biennium 2022-2023 to establish a work program to scale up mitigation ambition, convene an annual high-level ministerial roundtable on pre-2030 ambition, and to prepare a synthesis report on long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. And €400,000 will be required in the biennium 2022-2023 to organize the Glasgow Dialogue in cooperation with the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts. Under agenda item 3B, report of the subsidiary body for the implementation funding in the amount of €116,000 in the biennium 2022-2023 will be required to support the Doha work program on Article 6 of the Convention. The same estimate was reported under SBI 52 through 55, agenda item 18A. Under agenda item 4, matters relating to adaptation, supplementary funding in the amount of 1.66 million euro will be required in the biennium 2022-2023 for the support of 4 workshops, a compilation and synthesis of the submission of the views on achieving the objectives of the work program, and the preparation of a single annual report on the workshops. Under agenda item 5, methodological issues relating to the enhanced transparency framework for action and support referred to in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, supplementary funding in the amount of 11.3 million euros will be required for the biennium 2022-2023 for the development of software for the electronic reporting of common reporting tables, developing and conducting technical training workshops, establishing an interactive web portal to facilitate information availability. It also includes training and certification of the review experts for the BTRs and the development of training courses. Under agenda item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts, supplementary funding in the amount of 330,000 euro will be required for the biennium to organize a technical workshop to elaborate on the submission of the views on the various aspects of the Santiago network and to support and to provide support for developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, who may seek technical assistance from organizations, bodies, networks, and experts under the Santiago network. Under agenda item 8E, new collective quantified goal on climate finance, funding in the amount of 4.2 million euro will be the biennium to organize 4 technical expert dialogues per year with expert in conjunction with the SBs and 2 remaining dialogues in separate regions, supporting the ad hoc working program, providing substantive support to co-chairs and preparing technical experts for the high-level ministerial dialogues and preparing annual reports to CMA. Under agenda item 11, report of the forum on the impact of implementation of resource measures, supplementary funding in the amount of 26,000 euro will be required in 2022 to organize a 2-day workshop to further advance work on the implementation of the forum's work plan. Additional staff costs of 19,000 euro will be absorbed within existing resources for implementation of these activities. For the information of the parties, the same estimate is provided to the COP and the CMP under the respective agenda items. Under agenda item 12A, guidance on cooperative approaches referred to in Article 6, paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement, funding in the amount of 9.5 million euro will be required for the biennium for the organization of technical workshops, the design, development, maintenance of mandated systems, including international registry, the Article 6 database, and the centralized accounting and reporting platform, as well as preparation and delivery of the annual compilation and synthesis report of Article 6 technical expert review and related capacity building activities. Under agenda item 12B, rules, modalities, and procedures for the mechanism established by Article 6, paragraph 4 of the Paris Agreement, funding in the amount of 14.5 million euro will be required for the biennium for the operation of the mechanism established by Article 6, paragraph 4 of the Paris Agreement, including design, development, maintenance of the mechanism registry and information systems, providing support to the constituted bodies, the assessment of activities, including operation of the accreditation system, and to design and implement a capacity building program, assisting parties wishing to volunteer to participate in the mechanism. The decision taken by the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol at its 16th session under its agenda item 5 matters relating to the Clean Development Mechanism includes the authorization to transfer 30 million USD from the Trust Fund of Clean Development Mechanism to the Trust Fund for Supplementary Activities for the work of the supervisory body to facilitate the expedited implementation of the Article 6.4 mechanism. The CMP decision also includes the authorization to transfer 10 million USD from the Trust Fund for Clean Development Mechanism to the Trust Fund for Supplementary Activities for the work of the supervisory body to provide through regional collaboration centers, capacity building in developing countries to apply the Article 6.4 mechanism and support for transition of Clean Development Mechanism project activities and programs of activities to the Article 6.4 if they're eligible for transition. Under the agenda item 12C, work program under the framework of non-market approaches referred to in Article 6, paragraph 8 of the Paris Agreement, funding in the amount of 2.9 million euro will be required for the biennium for development of web-based platforms, organizing the Glasgow Committee on NMAs, a workshop with broad participation of relevant experts on matters related to non-market approaches and for preparing the synthesis report. Resource requirements in 2024 and beyond resulting from decisions taken at the session will be treated in line with established budgetary processes. We hope that the Secretariat can count on the continued support of parties to provide adequate and timely supplementary funding for these activities to be undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The draft report is contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021 L3. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft report on the understanding that the rapporteur, with the assistance of the Secretariat, will complete the report and make it available to all parties. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. I invite the CMA to consider agenda sub-item 17B, closure of the session. The COP adopted a draft resolution expression of gratitude to the government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the people of the city of Glasgow. The draft resolution was presented earlier by Egypt. I propose that the CMA take note of this resolution. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. This brings us to the end of the CMA. I declare the third session of the Conference of the Parties served.
I clearly have
Recording stopped.